Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone, and good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen, and a happy Tuesday to you.
Good morning.
Back at another week again.
Again, let's do it.
So any other announcements or things that have popped out here recently that anyone wants to talk about? Any other news articles? I'm just quickly perusing the Microsoft blog and the Fabric blog. See if there's anything out there that's really good.
What are we talking about today, Mike?
Kind of.
Oh, we should probably do before we do the news. Let's do our main topic. Good call, Tommy. Keeping with the format that we agreed to. An article came out on LinkedIn recently. A gentleman by the name of Thomas has presented just a really interesting conversation around goodbye Power BI Premium capacity. So we're going to talk about, is Power BI Premium dead? Is it going away? What does this look like? And what does this mean for your organization as we move forward with things? So that's going to be our main topic. Before we get into our main topic, looking for some news articles. Anything worth noting or of talking about? Anybody find anything that was interesting? I saw that there was Tyndall showing up for ALM Toolkit, but I think we might have talked about that previously.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to test that out at all?
Negative.
That's a win there. I like that one. I will say this. I'm very I like using Tabular Editor. This is maybe a beat from the street a little bit more than maybe potentially news, but the DAX Query View has been announced in both the Power BI.com service and in Power BI Desktop. So there is some really interesting commands when you go into the DAX Query View where you're able to script out all the measures in this table, all the measures in the model, or only this one measure. And recently I had built a Power BI data model, a semantic model, in the service, not using the default, but making my own and building the entire model in the service. I didn't realize you can't download that model from the service after you've built it. So if you build something in the service, it stays there. It doesn't let you download a PBIX file of just the model, which makes sense. There's no PBX file that it came from. So that being said, I had a whole bunch of measures that were stuck in a model that had a direct lake. I was doing Power BI embedding, and I couldn't do that with Power BI embedding. So I needed to get all my measures out and try to figure out how to rebuild them. So I was able to recreate the model, use import mode on tables in desktop, and I could script out all the measures, define them, copy the code out of the service, put it in desktop, and rerun or create all the measures again. Saved me a ton of time and errors and headache, and wow, it was amazing. So I was thoroughly impressed. I know this is like the idea of like Tabular Editor 3, like it can just do this stuff naturally, but to have this built into the tool, already integrated, I don't have to go start up another third-party tool. I really like the experience.
It's not available for the default semantic model yet, I believe, because you can't.
The DAX Query View?
Yeah,
I think you're right.
I agree. Like the scripting view, even though I just did a training on Tabular Editor 3 and we went through it and like the use cases for using the scripting.
Yep.
But that being said, Mike, to your point, using a desktop, because you can save those queries, is integral. You can't do that on the web yet.
Yes.
But just to be able to go through that real quickly, like I don't want to spin up an instance or in the sense of the application. It sounds like first world, third world problems, so to speak. Just like I can't open up Tabular Editor. I don't want to waste 30 seconds. But there's kind of something to be said. Like I want to test something out. I want to take a quick look.
What if your organization doesn't allow third-party tools, or you're not going to pay for Tabular Editor? I mean, there is, yes, Tommy, you're right, but I mean, not everyone's going to be able to have an enterprise version of Tabular Editor and connect to things in the service or on local or whatever. So there's going to be some limitations there for some organizations, and this is just a really good alternative. And this is one of these features that I'm like, wow, this is extremely helpful. Saved me a ton of time, and I was kind of dreading rebuilding this model because like, oh, I've got like 10 measures I got to rebuild. Like, it's about working smarter and faster than anything else, and it's those death by 1,000 cuts that make things annoying. And so this is feeling like it's making it easier.
I will say too, around the same scope, I've been using more and more, or with some of the projects, the default semantic model and building off of that. It's still a little difficult because again, you don't have all the features available.
Yeah.
To see the changes immediately in the report. So I have two windows open, and one's the semantic model I'm building. The one's the reports. Oh, got a relationship or want that measure.
Yep.
And I still wish there's a save button in the web. There's just something in me because it auto save.
Yes.
But just to like quickly do the refresh, there's no refresh that's needed.
Yeah.
Likes the changes. It's still a wow moment. The fact that it's an immediate update in any report that's connected to it.
I would agree with that, and I think that's a really good point. And I think it's going to get better. It sounds like it's going to get improve or smooth over time. So yeah, like the feature. Very happy for DAX Core Review. Lots of good things coming out there. So I just want to point that out as kind of a news article there. But I don't really see any other big articles. I will say this: it feels like right before we go to a conference, though, the announcements on the blog posts kind of go a little thin. They go a little slow down. There's not as many like announcements about features and things because I think honestly I think they're really holding back some features and going to announce a lot of things at conferences. And I get it. I understand. They want to create some hype. People are showing up. They're going to spend the effort to record people demoing these new features. Why not make it a big splash? So I understand. Yeah. So we're probably not going to get a lot of news here in the near term. Any other items?
Have you announced when their next big conference is? That's coming up, isn't it? In Europe?
Yes, it is in Europe. It's at the end of the month this month.
Oh.
Fabric Conference is the 25th, the 28th of September. So like in 2 weeks.
Which Radio means silence on the blogs.
Exactly. We're getting really close. I wonder if we will even get a desktop release before then. I don't know if that release cadence will push out a new desktop because that would be a dead giveaway if you're going to get desktop before that. Anyways. All right. Well, that being said, let's jump over to our main topic today. And I'll be honest, I picked this topic. Tommy, did you have something else to say? I'm sorry.
Just a quick beat on the street. Very lighthearted. So,
go ahead.
And I'm intrigued if your tools have changed. So, been doing a lot of training, and I'm also passing on a lot of it, train the trainer, with some of my clients. And they're like, "So, what are some of those tools that you're using that we've noticed while you're doing the training?" And I just kind of went through like my essential toolkit for any training that I do. So, and I want to just see what you guys use when you guys do support or even just any screen sharing, because what I do now is if I don't have these tools, I feel like I am lost. Like I have no map, no phone with me.
Okay.
And the 3 are Zoom It, Power Toys, and Snagit. These are essential to any training that I'm doing. Zoom It is the one where I can zoom in, draw a square, or live zoom where I'm actually at. Power Toys, it's not necessarily meant for training or for screen sharing, but it has like a ton of Microsoft little like kind of hacks you could do. It's a Microsoft tool.
Yes.
One of the things
I use that one.
Yeah. One of the things is if I click, it will actually show like a red square or red circle where I clicked.
Interesting.
And so what I was telling the trainer in this meeting is like, listen, people don't know where, like how the intimate UI or the different UIs, when you do dashboard in a day, you're basically showing 3 applications. You're showing Power Query, you're showing Power BI Desktop, and you're showing the whole canvas. And the formatting pane. Those are 3 different user interfaces. So they don't know where you're clicking. So I don't know. Do you guys use anything else? I've heard of there's a few others out there for like window sharing, but those are essential to what I do.
The only thing I would add in there would be Teams. Teams is like, so I don't. While you use Snagit, I don't snag pictures using Snagit. I actually just use I use a combination of Zoom It and the Windows Shift S command, or so that's just grabbing a screen share or an image there. And I also find that I use inside the Zoom It features, I use Control 1 and Control 2 a lot. So Control 1 allows you to zoom in on the screen, and then you can draw on it. And then Control 2 doesn't zoom in the screen, but allows you to draw on it. So I'll use the combination of those 2 things back and forth. maybe because I do a lot of presentations and things online. The only thing I would maybe also add to this would be is I have a 1080p single-sized monitor that is only for my presentation. So if you have computers that have really wide screens or extra like desktops that have, I have one screen that's like a 49-inch really ultra wide screen. Great, good for working on, not good for presenting on because the screen gets too big.
It's really small.
And I like to share the entire screen because I'm zooming in and zooming out, and I can't share a window or a web browser page because those don't affect the zoom in, zoom out features. So I'll find a lot of times I'll do those kind of things. I'll use those tools. Anything else, Seth, that you do from additional presentation?
Zoom it. I'd snip it as opposed instead of snag it. The only other thing I would say is depending on the format, I usually have like Lucidchart just spun up on the side.
Good point. I will say that
because a lot of what we do is conceptual, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I'm always like, oh, okay, here are the boxes. Here's how this goes, and it is, I think, underutilized just in conversations in general. Like I pull it up in Teams, in meetings all the time because you're what people forget, especially in the data worlds, I think, we're so used to the world we live in. And when you start talking about related concepts, if people are not as familiar, they'll lose your first or second connection, and then they're lost for the rest of the meeting, right? So having the visual, even when I'm in other people's meetings, I'm like, hang on, because I'll start doodling in Lucid on the side just to make sure I'm following their train of thought. And it always has enhanced the conversation, always, because I can go back, and that's what note taking too. But when you're presenting, it's the Lucidchart thing to communicate ideas.
That's a good. I don't use Lucidchart. Lucidchart is also a good version. There's also Draw.io, which looks very similar to Lucidchart. But I actually use
too.
Yeah, I use Miro. Miro is the one that I like to use.
Yeah.
And what I have done that makes it very efficient for me is in Miro, you can make templates. The same thing I think you can do in like Lucidcharts or Draw.io. But I make a template page of all the commonly used elements and graphics. So I can literally just go into the application and quickly drag, oh, here's a fabric icon. Oh, here's a report icon. Here's a semantic model icon. And I can quickly make the architectures that I'm talking about within a couple minutes. So I've gotten really good at perfecting drawing things in real time, especially when people ask questions around architectures.
Yeah.
That's an underutilized part because I'm a huge diagram.io guy. Yeah, you can put the icons in. There's the quick shortcuts like S's for square.
Yep.
I feel like R would be for rectangle, but it's not. Anyways, but having that as kind of part of the tool belt, but also the conceptual side. What is that? The conceptual diagram. We had an episode on that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
This is underutilized. I feel like I want to see that more in my meetings. Yeah.
To that end, I will also say these tools, the reason I use these tools other than Microsoft Visio, like Visio is a program out there that is there for visualization stuff.
Yeah.
They just haven't kept up with like modern ways of building visual things. And it feels like Miro and Draw.io feel a lot more like Figma or modern drawing tools. And I've even seen people do like full-on Figma diagrams of explaining architecture diagrams as well. I started by building an Adobe XD architectural diagrams. And I had, hundreds of squares of architectures and designs and things all in that program. And then I started migrating them out to Miro and Figma because I like those programs better. But anyways, the idea though is you can build these really beautiful looking reports or architect these architectures fairly quickly now with tools. And PowerPoint and Visio haven't kept up. They're just not there. That's why I choose these other tools instead.
What would be your recommendation? And because I remember when you were on the Adobe XD train, and then I was like, I'll do that too, but just was not my cup of tea. Just because it's more of that Photoshop kind of more designer thing compared to Draw.io is, I don't want to say it's more stagnated, but it's just it's much quicker to spin something up.
I think
if you're to get someone who's like, I've never really done that before, whether it's in a meeting or just building conceptual diagrams, in a tool like this? Because I think that's kind of hard for people if you're not familiar with that. Is it just start doing it, or what would be your kind of like your ramp up, your learn how to learn those tools?
Yeah, I think a lot of those tools, particularly Draw.io, it's a lot about being comfortable with being able to find what you need quickly. For me, has been, if you're going to learning the tool is pretty straightforward. I think a lot of these diagramming tools is, as long as you can make a square and draw a line between the two squares in an easy way, it's a good tool. Like Visio will do that. Like that's a lot of what you talk about. It's like block diagrams. Okay, here's the data. Here's the source. What are we going to do to it? Are there other steps that we're missing? And then, let's talk about those considerations. So that's a lot of the conversation is just, you need a couple blocks on the screen to kind of show flow of data. And I'd also argue, Seth, you did a lot of this in SSIS, but it's like the control flow and the data flow of SSIS. I think it's like a control flow where you can kind of like wire things together. It's kind of like that idea of like, let's talk about the flow of the data. What is it going to go through the different blocks? Is that right?
I mean, yeah, but
that's horrible.
You talk about painful tools.
That is
the reason we don't use it anymore.
Exactly right. But it's the concept is there. You're starting to show that control flow of the data.
Yeah, and ultimately, what I love it is the best tools for me are the ones that allow you to easily and quickly grab shapes. You're like it's almost auto completing some of the connections and things for you now, and then you can go into like the easier, like, how does it copy and paste images? How can I snag something from a Word doc and easily paste it in? Like the cross transfer of like how I want to build the many different things I'm trying to share with people. Mm-hmm. So from conceptual all the way down to an extremely detailed architecture, right? Can it serve all those purposes? And as long, like, I think the tools that can traverse that are the strongest. But in general, like this conversation was just more of the whiteboarding experience. Yeah. Like how fast can I, share a quick thought with you, or we can be on the same page as far as like the conversation itself.
One other tool that I'll throw out there as well that's very easy to learn, has a lot of good diagrams on there, but it feels too clunky to do things with, is azurediagrams.com. Tommy, you've seen this one. I think you showed me a link and you maybe made some diagrams in there. It's a really good tool. It has very beautiful integrations with things, but it doesn't do the interesting thing. Like, it doesn't let me easily copy. Like, again, this is the thing with the Microsoft products. I can't use the Alt key, grab an object, and immediately make a copy of it. It's stuff like that. There needs to be, it's not, you can tell it's been designed by engineers and not by designers.
Yeah,
because designers would have made it a bit easier for you to create objects and things. So that's part of it's a good program. I just don't love it. It's just not really, there's missing some features there. Anyways, good tools there as well. I like that. That's a good little tip and trick there. So Zoom It, Power Toys, Miro, Draw.io, and
I think
those are
pretty. Well, if you're just starting out, it's a great list. So.
Yeah, it's a pretty good list. Excellent. Well, with that, let's jump into our main article for today. I'll be honest, this is the article that I picked here, and I'm going through a lot of transitions or communicating this with a lot of clients right now, and I thought this would be a very relevant topic. We are very fastly approaching the ability for people to not even buy Power BI Premium or Azure A SKUs or EM SKUs. A lot of the old premium capacities that we were traditionally buying are getting deprecated. They're getting removed. You're not going to be able to buy them anymore. So an article from Thomas today was talking about, okay, goodbye Power BI Premium capacity. Hello Fabric capacity. We're now killing out the Power BI side, and we're getting only Fabric capacities, I think, moving forward here. Initial thoughts, initial reactions. Tommy, Seth, do you have any reactions to this article? Do you see, are you planning for this? Are there things in your organization that you're looking at actively to say, hey, we have to think about a transition plan into Fabric? Are you thinking through those things?
Yes.
All right, great. Let's move on. Next topic.
Right. Well, thanks, guys. Yeah. So topic number 2. No. I think 2 big things that stuck out for me on this, that as I was going through and thinking about it, and also, again, a lot of conversations with my own clients, is there's a big difference between spinning something up completely new and a migration from Power BI Premium, because this is talking about you cannot purchase a new Power BI Premium capacity.
Correct.
Which is very different than most of my clients who already have a Power BI Premium capacity. I've been in organizations where it was 3/4 away until they were going to migrate to a new CRM system because of process change, technology change, and cost change, subscriptions, all the things. So just because Power BI Premium is not available, at least the article is talking very much to people who don't have premium at all, where they don't have any licensing. Maybe they have pro or premium per user, but they're not even in the premium capacity realm. So obviously their only choice is Fabric. It makes it obviously easier to get Fabric. The second point on there is just because you purchase Fabric, and if you're an organization going, we were going to get premium, now we can't, does not mean that you're also taking all of your current data processes and all of your current data systems and integration and moving them to Fabric. You just happen to have the Fabric capacity. So those are really the two big things that stuck out to me right off the bat. One, just because it's new, you can't purchase premium does not mean that organizations today have to change. And then two, doesn't mean that you're moving all of your current processes and systems over.
No, you will be. You
will be, but you can't. So I can renew my premium capacity.
So you're
right?
I
can't purchase the new one.
You can't renew.
That's the point.
So that's the point.
No, you can't.
If I already have premium,
there's going to be a period of time.
Premium license, when that current contract is up, I can't renew my P SKU.
Right. So
if that's what you're suggesting, that's not accurate. They want to get rid of the P SKU. You have to migrate to the F SKU.
You can renew up to a certain point. So there's a point in time. I think it was, I want to say, I don't know. I'm trying to put my finger on the real article from Microsoft Fabric blog, because there was a Fabric blog post that said, hey, by the way, this is one of our older episodes too. But by the way, you're not going to be able to purchase a premium SKU as of I thought it was like June or July of this year. So right now you can't even purchase July.
Yeah.
So you can't purchase new premium Power BI P1 SKUs anymore. If you already had one, you can maintain it. But it was a very tight timeline from, okay, you now can't purchase any new ones. If you have one, you're able to re-up it up until a certain point. And I thought it was like up until 2025.
That's what I thought too.
And then you could at least renew until that point. But then after that moment, you're not allowed to renew anymore. And then you're going to have to migrate at some point.
If you have a premium capacity, you can renew. I think I believe I remember the 2025, and it doesn't automatically roll over into an F SKU.
I'm gonna go try and find. I'm gonna find the article. From Microsoft.
We should. I read it. Yeah. I read it in such a way that if you were going to renew, you would have had to have done it in the time frame.
Yes.
Of the July 1st thing, right? Or in your next cycle.
Right.
So if I'm past that already, I can't. I read it like I couldn't renew, right? So if my license ends at the end of the year, my impression was I'm migrating to the F SKU because I can't re-up again. But I could be wrong. Like let's find it while we go. Anyway, I think to answer your question, Mike, am I thinking about it? Yeah, absolutely. Because well, before I tell you my point, I think Tommy, you nail in and dial in the right thing as far as like that migration point, and that's why the dates are going to be important here, because there is going to be a cutoff where you do have to purchase the F SKU. You have to reassign the capacities, right? In your environment, so you don't have any downtime.
Right.
So understanding when your P SKU renewal or end period is going to be important for organizations. Where I'm pre-thinking about this is I would imagine it's the same in the vast majority of orgs. The costs are going to shift from one business area to another, which is more of an interesting conversation, especially
I didn't think of that.
as you're coming into the next budget cycle, or where you're talking about next year. So definitely a call out related to it's going to be in the technology sectors, right? It's going to be the teams that own and manage Azure, and they should definitely be aware that this is going to come their way, and that it's going to be part of their budget instead of out of office land.
As the famous Lee Corso from college football used to say, not so fast. Because think about this, just because you have the Fabric SKU doesn't mean you're opening up the playground to everybody, right? Because I could absolutely do Fabric now the way I'm doing Power BI Premium. I mean by that, so I could absolutely use Fabric, the Fabric capacity, with just my semantic models. I don't have to migrate anything from Azure, and since I could keep the cost where it is. So if I have a Fabric capacity, I could literally change nothing to my current processes, keep everything in Azure or keep everything where it already is, and use the Fabric capacity like I'm using a premium capacity. I'm using this for semantic model refreshes, and I'm using this for people to get access to the reports. I don't necessarily have to. I'm not saying this is the right idea, but I don't have to immediately use a Lakehouse, immediately use Jupyter Notebooks, immediately put data integration, data engineering into Fabric.
Yes.
Are you jumping into a different topic, or are you talking about my cost thing?
Yeah,
I'm talking about
that has nothing to do with it.
There's nothing to do with it.
It has nothing to do with it.
Why?
Because you are typically purchasing a P SKU through the Microsoft 365 portal,
and
when you purchase
or reseller, where this gets sticky.
Correct.
Right? Because the people that are managing the subscriptions or licenses for the organization are a lot of times using resellers, right?
Correct. Yes. Because they don't manage that.
Because licensing is such a fun topic. But all I'm suggesting is who pays for it and where we manage it is now in two different places. It's in a different place completely. You're moving it into the technology center. It's going to show up in a different budget line item.
Because I can't purchase this in the Office 365 admin center.
Right.
Correct. You're now purchasing it from Azure directly.
Which leads into one of my favorite points about the whole thing is I'm happy because if you've had experience with SKUs, right? Or any of the licensing that you could manage in Azure, oh my gosh, it's 10 times better. The ability for us to spool up, go from A3 to an A4 to an A5, like with clicks of a button, just like we do with every other cloud service. Amazing. Biggest gripe in the past. Why can't I do that with a P SKU, right? Like now you can. And that's one of the best things about this from my perspective, just from a manageability standpoint, because the people that are managing these environments and monitoring and administrating them, right? Like you now have ownership instead of this really, in quotes, fun experience that it has been where, if you needed to go from a P1 to a P2 or you needed another P1, right? Like there was no option. You had to go down this route of like, let me contact, different part of the org or my reseller, and then I have to get this spooled up and yada yada.
My gosh, thinking about that, you're right. There's a ton of implications there too on who's owning that and in terms of monitoring that cost.
Yeah, especially if you have big P SKUs environments, right? It's like, hey guys,
what are we doing?
Or gals, right? Like we're pushing this part of the budget into this other area. Like finance needs to know that, and or so does the organization, so that, to your point, Tommy, depending on how large things are, you might, you'll have to reassign a bunch of capacities.
Yeah. Does this affect? I don't remember that article. And Mike, if you do find it, was there anything else on the premium per user on there, or is that also going away as the dinosaur at this point?
So my understanding is premium per user is not Fabric. So premium per user is a collection of settings or things that are Power BI premium related, but that are not directly linked to Fabric. Okay. So this will be interesting. So this is why I think this LinkedIn post is very important here, right? you need to understand the difference between Power BI Premium per user and Fabric now. So previously it was like, okay, do I need a premium capacity? Is it based on a user licensing model, or is it based on a capacity purchasing dedicated hardware model, right? And that was the A and the P SKUs are doing. Now with Fabric, because all the other SKUs, and it makes a lot of sense to me because the licensing is much clearer now. It was very confusing to like, which license should I use? Should I use the Azure one? Should I use the Microsoft 365 license to be able to embed things for my customers or embed internally? Like, there was so much confusion there that Microsoft has finally ironed all that out, and now it's just you can embed wherever you want. You want to embed internally, it's an F SKU. You want to embed externally, it's an F SKU. It's the same thing, which makes a ton of sense, and there's no restrictions there. So I think from that perspective, they've simplified the licensing thing now. But now going back to Premium per user and Fabric, now there's a difference between those two SKUs. And one of the things I kept thinking in my mind, I've actually had people ask me, is do you think there's going to be a Fabric per user capacity being purchased? And I don't see it happening. I don't think, the price point of a Fabric SKU is so reasonable and it goes down so small that you don't really need, I don't think you want a premium or a Fabric per user capacity. You can go down to an F2. And then if you add reserve pricing to it, it's $150 a month. You don't need many users at $20 a user to cover the cost of that SKU to be able just to play with what things are happening inside Fabric. So I'm really to the point where I'm like, okay, yes, you're very limited. You can really scale down things, but the value of all the services that you can get from Fabric is way above $150 a month for what you get with those lower end SKUs. Granted, you're not going to be doing it on big data. You have to be very smart about how you're using your capacity. You could quickly run out of it, but it does all the things you want to do or try. It's a very good deal, I think. Sorry. What was your question, Tommy? I ran on a tangent there, I think, a little bit too much.
I think that's perfect. But one quick thing on the support for the premium capacity. I know we're looking on Google. I don't think we read all of the article. So this is actually a tidbit from Thomas Anderson's post.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an existing premium customer, you have a few options. You can choose to do nothing, as support for existing subscriptions continues until January 2026 or 2028, depending on agreements. So they're still going to actually have support for premium at least for the next year and a half at minimum.
Support. But, again,
you can't purchase it new.
Correct. No purchasing is done basically at this point.
Purchasing is done. New purchasing is done.
Yes. And they have to give you a long runway until you get out of the old world of thinking or the old stuff you were doing. I get that.
So I don't know if you guys had a direction to go, but one of the points I feel like where we're going is very much on whether or not you're forced to go to Fabric. There are a lot of considerations here. Mike, I know this was your article, so I don't know if you had one of the roads, but to me, it sounds like we're going into what do we need to prepare for and what are the biggest things, not just from a licensing point of view, but from a shift in the organization. I think we talked about obviously where the cost is coming from, but there's a ton of other considerations. So Mike, I can let you drive with this or we can go down that route.
Well, again, my main thoughts were, I like the idea of what they were talking about here. So one is understanding the difference in licenses you're going to be able to purchase in the future, right? So I think it was just being able to talk through like, okay, what's the difference between Premium per user and Fabric? Because I think that's going to be now the main distinction, right? I have a Power BI Pro license, I have a Premium per user license, and I have a Fabric license. That makes things much simpler to think about because now there's a lot less SKUs to be talking about in the conversation. So one, that simplifies it for us contractors or people helping make decisions. The main difference I think we see here is, can I make lake houses and all the data engineering and data science things that Fabric offers us in that regard? That's the big difference between a Premium per user and the Fabric experience. So now it feels like there's actually 3 tiers of software that you can buy in the Fabric realm. But my next thought was, I want to think about, okay, how do you evaluate your current utilization? Which SKU should you buy? Is there a pattern that you see on how you should absorb or start buying Fabric and seeing what you can do with it? And so I think there's also some conversation here as well as you're thinking about the migration of going from your other premiums into Fabric. Depending on what you're buying, you get more features. And I'm not sure every organization is ready to absorb those new features. If you're on anything less than a P1, you don't have Fabric items. You can't, if you're on an Azure A SKU, you don't get Fabric. So if you're doing something in A SKUs or you're building things inside premium capacities, testing things out, you don't have a lakehouse. So for some of those organizations that have opted for buying smaller premium SKUs today currently, I think you need a conversation with your groups who are using anything in premium. Like, what are you doing with it? Are you able to transition into Fabric? And do we understand by going into Fabric and moving into Fabric, you're going to get all these extra items.
Yeah.
And that's going to chip away at more of your compute and usage. So if you choose to use Fabric, what kind of patterns should you rebuild? One of the patterns that I see right now, and I'm not sure if he's talked about this in the article, he's talking about utilization patterns. He's talking about usage types. I think users are going to really enjoy the notebook experience. I've been teaching a lot of people around notebooks, how good they are, how you can write SQL or Spark SQL inside them. And I'm finding they're pretty seamless to use with all the other things that are in Fabric. And I'm trying to push people away from using data flows now. Data flows is quite behind. It doesn't have the features that all the other items have inside Fabric. So if you are using data flows in your organization, I do think you need to have a conversation around that and say, can we review those pipelines and can we migrate them into a notebook type experience that will save you more compute usage?
So I know you're a big proponent of this and you dive right into it all the time, which, hey, cool. But what I do want to do is back up a second, because if we're talking about Power BI Premium,
Yep.
You're talking about Power BI capacities and users, right?
Correct.
And what I do want to push in here is kind of two things. One is, the first is, just because you're moving into an FSKU or Fabric as this environment doesn't mean that you have to enable it for your organization. You can keep the Fabric features hidden for the most part. And maybe that's a good approach if you're just a Power BI shop initially, to understand what the capacity is doing in terms of your PSKU. Should be the same. Should be the same. I'm saying you're transitioning from one license to another. What do I need to be aware of in that transition? You want stable to stable is what I'm
Correct.
getting at.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I don't have stable to stable, right, and I'm not using Fabric features right now, to automatically pull over and go into an FSKU and now have to potentially contend with all of the other stuff that you're talking about, that is above and beyond what my current capacity is planned to do. If I have a peak capacity that I know is operating at at a level of, here are my peaks and valleys, here's what I can expect, I'm at a certain threshold, right? Especially if I'm pushing the bounds of my current capacity, I don't want to move into like the FSKU and then all of a sudden nothing works anymore. Because all of a sudden, because what you're doing is, what I'm getting at is the additional workloads that you can start doing in Fabric by moving or creating more of your data processing and things into this ecosystem. I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that is wildly different than what you were using that PSKU for.
And I think
potentially, right? Because I'm not saying like organizations could be using Fabric features, etc. But if they're not, that's what I'm driving at. You're not instantly in a Power BI only implementation where I'm not using Fabric, going to a Fabric SKU and then opening the doors on notebooks and stuff.
And I want to hammer on that as well, because there's a huge part where if you actually, the first step in any of this should be your examination of your current capacity on what are you using. And what I've seen, most organizations, they don't have a lot of extra budget in their capacity to use for other things. Like, wow, we're only using 40% of our capacity. We have the 60% we could just play around with. Usually it's these semantic models or these workspaces that they're constantly trying to drive down the amount of resources that's going down. So, and if you're just going to move to, let's say you're moving to the exact similar capacity in Fabric.
Yep.
And now you're going to open up the playground of all the other, the Lake House slide and the swing of Jupyter notebooks when you're already dealing with constraints before. I mean, you're asking for, I think, a unstable rollout. To me, I think that most organizations would want to have a conservative way of looking at this. Either they're doing a lower Fabric SKU off the bat, or you're doing what's our long-term plan. We're going to have a pilot stage of any extra products, but most organizations are going to want to go, I want to go from P to F with the same products I have, and I want to just make sure that I have the capacity there.
Okay, so let me pause you right there. There's a number of features that I think we're talking about the same things. I want to be very clear about an admin feature that lets you do that exactly, right? So one thing that we're talking about is we're saying a P SKU doesn't have the same features as an F SKU. And my understanding is everything you need to do in a P SKU is the same as what you can do in an F SKU. There's no different feature toggles between the two.
Understood.
Now, however, to your point, Seth, earlier was like, look, if I have a P SKU and I'm utilizing a certain amount of capacity or whatever today, just because I turn on Fabric, I don't necessarily want my team to say immediately start building lake houses, pipelines, and all these other things inside Fabric. So there needs to be,
if that's not part of your environment,
current
right
environment,
you're not
exactly
an
right.
early adopter.
Right.
All I'm pushing here is,
you're
not moving into an environment where you're automatically forced where this is all just going to be live, and you have to figure out how that's going to impact your capacity.
Agree. And there's a setting inside the admin portal that I think does this and toggles the ability for you to create. So you can't turn off the UI of the Fabric things. It's just gonna be inside Power BI.com no matter what. You'll see them there. So to me, there's already, if you haven't already educated or that haven't been able to educate your team, there is a acknowledgement of, hey, you're going to see changes in the Power BI.com experience. We're going to transition from P to an F SKU, but we're going to limit the ability of users to create any Fabric items by using in the Microsoft Fabric area, users can create Fabric items. If you make a security group, so again, one thing to be clear here is if you're an organization that needs to control who's creating Fabric things, especially on these lower end SKUs, because I'm not worried about an F64 and higher because I'm assuming you've kind of already figured this out, right? Because an F64 and higher matches a P1. They're the same performance. They have the same aspects. So from that lens, I think it's the same. There's no issue there. When you're playing on anything less than an F64, F16, F32, F2, any of those, you potentially have been using a SKU from Azure that doesn't have the ability to create Fabric items. And so to me, it's more of this is an edge case. This is a smaller window of customers, but I know there are some out there that are doing it. You need to be mindful of this. Can your users create Fabric items? I'd recommend create a security group. Make sure you put in the people you want to either test or build things with Fabric into that security group, and then open up that Fabric items just for that security group. And also, I would recommend, just for me, this is how I'm planning it right now, you don't need to have one massive SKU for your entire organization now. You can now carve up that SKU into smaller units for what different teams may want to use. And I think this is a bit of a contention here for some organizations, especially as we think about, let's imagine you're a bigger organization. You have 6 departments and each department needs some level of Fabric, whatever that may be. You could buy one really large Fabric SKU, an F.256, or you could carve that out into 3 separate SKUs or 4 separate SKUs, or you could cut the, bigger SKU into smaller SKUs. That way you provide isolation from each of the teams. The cost is still the same, but now you have isolation of compute between the different teams. So if someone's being a noisy neighbor and they're doing a lot of abusive things in the service, they're not going to impact other teams on the same SKU.
But there are feature differences between those SKUs, though.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Aren't there?
There is no difference. Go ahead.
Certain capabilities on the lower SKUs that are not? Or is that just like Copilot and...
It's Copilot is like the only thing that's really different. I mean, there was some, workspace scoped security permissions that were maybe not going to be, but it looks like they've been fixed. There's a couple feature differences, but Copilot be one of them, right? The Copilot doesn't work on anything below an F64. But other than that, I think almost all other features are there, and there's all the other feature capabilities for Fabric. They exist in all environments. I'm trying to think of the list of things that are different between an F64 and higher versus the F64 and lower items. Yeah, so I think Michael Fortman is giving us some confirmation in the chat. It's an F64 and higher, where an AI skills, again, all the AI things seem to be F64 and higher.
Even I was able to create one with my non F64, but that's I mean, Microsoft, I'm fine. No, right.
That's a
Don't
bug.
turn it off for me.
Don't turn it off, please.
Let me propose a scenario for you, because as you guys are, the conversation's going, I'm considering this, and we're talking a lot about the licensing technology, but my reactions are lighting up in my head. There's a lot of planning, and there's a lot of people and process needs to go into this in terms of how you're going to roll this out. Whether or not this is, dude, if I'm opening up the playground, who am I going to open this up to? The whole organization to have the lake house?
Yeah. Okay, but this is where where I'm throwing the line down. Okay. Because think about the vast majority of audience that is always asking questions about premium, just the P SKU, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You're talking about a platform shift in licensing. What I'm trying to draw in here is this nice calm zone, okay, where I'm a Power BI shop. All you need to do is go into the admin settings, understand what Fabric features you can control and turn off because they're not part of your platform.
Exactly.
Move over. There's a grace period in here probably as well, right? Move from the P SKU to the F SKU. You can see that the capacity works as expected. All the usage metrics are there. Stabilize. Then if you choose to
open it up,
do all the stuff you guys are talking about. Like, but before that, there's a calm here. And no, it doesn't require like a billion people. It's some conversations with how budgets are cycling. And I can literally do this crap myself in a half a day, regardless of the size of your capacity, like how big you are. All you're doing is you're moving your capacity from one to the other. That's a workspace thing. It is not this massive ordeal, Tommy. And that's what there's a calm here.
The initial, yes, I agree with you. With the initial side, you can do
as
that
long as we're on that track.
Yes, no,
going from P to F SKU, pretty seamless.
Agree. You can do that. Go on vacation to Hawaii for a week, kind of thing, and nothing's going to break. I agree with you. However, you're going to eventually have the conversation where your goal is, for most organizations, I imagine, you're not just getting the Fabric because you have to, and then you don't want to touch any of those other features. Eventually, again, I could not agree with you. If I could agree with you 110%, I would agree with you 100%, 10% on that stable to stable. Okay. We're not opening up anything else. I just want to reiterate how much I agree with you on that, and we're on the same page. But that's step one, right? Like that's just the beginning of your
step
Fabric
one
journey.
One of one.
One. Could be.
It could be step one of one.
Could be.
What I am also picking up from you, Tommy, is a shared excitement, and I have it as well, of the potential now that you have to use the Fabric ecosystem to enhance what you've been building, probably internally, right? And that is absolutely something to be excited about, and why Fabric is so awesome,
right?
And that's where I do agree. You have to start, like, that is a different plan. That is hey, we're going to start to chew up some of this capacity.
That's
do these other things, right? And that's an intentional shift after I already know, things look the same.
Sure.
Yes. We're good to go. I'm now going to start planning or transitioning some things or building that new things into Fabric. What is that doing to my capacity? Because those are intentional decisions you need to track in order to understand what it is you need to budget for, or transition cost from one area to another, or potentially what's going to happen a lot here is you have a ton of hidden costs going on in your organization that now you're going to start paying for in your capacity.
So this is a great segue, by the way, because that's the scenario that I have for you guys as we're having this conversation. Is after even if it's step 1 of 1, there's now that initial conversation. So let me propose this scenario for you.
I don't want to do that yet. We're still talking about this topic. You're trying to transition to a new topic. I don't want to go there yet. Just hang on to your thought. Cool. I want to add a couple of thoughts here to what Seth was saying.
Cool.
I think there's some friction areas that I want everyone to pay attention here. So this article highlighted for me, like I'm thinking through, if I'm an organization and I'm trying to transition from a P or A SKU into a Fabric SKU, what kind of areas should I be considerate? Seth, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's definitely a clear conversation we need to have with the team. I think your center of excellence, if you have one, you should definitely start. If you don't have one, you should start thinking about seriously getting one, because this is an activity that I think the center of excellence should be participating in. We should be thinking about where are we at and where do we want to get to. I totally agree with the whole, let's keep it a smooth, easy transition. Let's not make any bumps in the road. So definitely paying for that. But there's 2 points of friction that I see coming up. If you have current capacities that you're going to want to transition from a P SKU to an F SKU, you could have hundreds, maybe thousands of workspaces on a premium SKU, and you're going to need to transition them to the F SKU. So is there an automated way to do that? I believe there are a series of API calls. I think you can do this. There's things you can automate with that, but there will be a need for you to, if your organization is established and you have a lot of workspaces, the workspace is tied to the license. So you're going to have to go through all those licenses and transition. It is what it is. I think that's a conversation you need to have. You need to plan for it. That's something you want to at least discuss.
Which you can now easily see in that admin view of workspaces, right? Like you can see what capacities are being used on each workspace. So as you flip them over, it shouldn't be a problem at all. And it's the same thing as today. Like you can flip out any of the capacities on a workspace with no impact to the objects within the workspace, right? Like it's just what is the horsepower behind this thing.
Correct.
It's not going to rebuild everything, regenerate all the GUIDs or anything like that. It's just swapping things on the back end.
Agree on that.
So it's a very seamless experience. And that's why I was pushing at Tommy saying like, I could do this in a half a day. Like
it's seamless,
when
but
you
not.
Get to the point.
Like
correct.
Unless you automate, like, so literally there's physically the only way that I'm aware of doing this is either writing some fancy code, either a PowerShell or in a notebook, to select a workspace and then transition an API call to say, transition this workspace to a different capacity, which can be done. I think there's going to be more examples of this coming out soon. If nothing else, I will put out a notebook that's going to transition between SKUs if I want. But I mean, if you have thousands of workspaces, yes, the admin portal will tell you on this capacity, here's all the workspaces. My workspaces and others, right? There's a lot of them that are doing this. If I can go to the workspace, I can transition, right? So you can't, currently in the admin portal, I can't say migrate this workspace to a different capacity in the admin workspace. I think it needs to be developed. Microsoft, you need to build that feature in there because that would be great. Because I should be able to pick all of my P SKUs, right? All the workspaces on a P SKU. I should be able to say, select these 10 workspaces or even the my workspaces that have been added to premium, because you can do that as well, and transition them to a new capacity. So that should be a thing. And then my other part is, when you move into Fabric, we are now transitioning away from what we've been doing in Power BI Premium, which has been, if you run a Dataflow Gen 1, a Dataflow Gen 1, I think, saves its files to a storage account. And I'm not sure if this is still going to be supported, but the storage capacity of those data flows are saved into a storage account. That storage account is then managed by Microsoft, and you don't pay for that storage because it's part of the PowerBI.com purchasing service that you're using. If you transfer over to Fabric now and start using Dataflows Gen 2, again, this is a migration thing. You don't have to do this. You can still stay with the Dataflows Gen 1. But as you use Lakehouses and Dataflows Gen 2, you have the ability of making your own storage account. And the One Lake experience, which is, I would argue, extremely valuable, very helpful, but you now start paying for storage. So that's another big transition moment here that I think I want people to have conversations about. around does this make sense for our organization? Are we willing to turn this on? And are we storing a ton of data, or we will be storing a ton of data in the lakehouse? That will be a cost that will be directly impacting your bottom line. So it's not a, I was a P SKU and now I'm moving to F64. If you turn on the right settings, yes, the cost could be identical. But if you don't, and you're not mindful of it, you could be adding costs of storage costs in there as well. I just want people to be aware of that feature, that it's existing. Like, just know about it.
Yeah, Mike, you've just given me 2 future topics, by the way.
Well, again, I'm trying to unpack what this means for me in my organization and other organizations as well. As I'm unpacking these things, I'm just trying to look for like, where are the bumps in the road potentially going to appear from? Right. So that's all I'm trying to point out here. I love the feature. I love that we're going with this. I think it's the right move for everyone. I'm just trying to make sure that there are ample conversations around this one. And the last note I want to point out here is, Tommy, you made a great point. And Seth, I think I'm trying to join your 2 points here together. In the same way, we don't want to give access to PowerBI.com without some level of initial training. The same thing should be handled for Fabric. There should be some level of initial, you have to understand what these things are. We want you to be capable at a very basic level before you get in there. So if nothing else, attend a Fabric in a Day training. Attend, if you're going from no Power BI to Power BI, I would recommend make sure you run people through a Power BI in a day before you get access to a license in PowerBI.com. You just there's just things people need to know and understand about the program so they don't get, confused or build things that are so bad that you're like, what are we doing? It's just chaos. So you do want some sort of plan on how to roll these things out to other people as well. Anyways, those are my last 2 points. No. Sorry, Tommy, go to your scenario.
No, I think we're pretty close on time. So I think, like I said, that can be saved for a future topic, because
I agree.
And I'll give just a little preview. I think that conversation is very much on the scenarios of rolling out Fabric, the right way to do it. Because yes, we can do this one-to-one. This is my closing thought. But I think just doing that without a future conversation, I think we'd all be on the same page here. We'd be selling yourself short, because you're getting Fabric. Maybe you're just getting Fabric because, again, premium capacity is not available. Okay. Well, there's probably a ton of situations that you have in your organization or your team that Fabric can very much solve for, even if it is just the Gen 2 Lakehouse pushing data there. That alone, or to your point, Mike, switching to notebooks from data flows, that alone can be worth the cost, or as a cost of gold. And I've even seen that myself now.
Yep.
So as you have this conversation on transitioning, there's also the strategic side of this as well, that I would be very much look forward to hearing your thoughts on it in a future episode, on the scenarios of how do we strategically roll it out? What are the scenarios that we'd be dealing with, and what are the plans?
We don't want to implement technology looking for a problem, right? We want to go into this thinking like we have existing problems and this fits the need, as opposed to here's a technology, let's go find a problem we can go fix with this technology. That's the wrong approach here, I think.
Yeah.
My final thoughts are, start talking about this now. There's a lot of good documentation out there. We're trying to have the conversation now to get people thinking about this mentality now, before it comes out and the change actually occurs. Start thinking about what your smooth transition plan looks like. Don't feel like you have to turn over to a new SKU and turn on all the features day one. I don't think that's the right approach. I really liked your comment, Seth. I thought it was really good. Make the transition smooth. Just move over to the SKU, keep everything turned off initially. Just make sure that everything runs well in the new environment. And then after that, start planning out what does the potential changes look like. So I think billing changes are also a big discussion point. Discuss how your company wants to handle the changes in billing, from going from, Microsoft 365 purchasing agreement to an Azure purchasing agreement. Does that now shift who's responsible? Is this now an IT budget thing, or is this something the business still needs to own? So like thinking about that as well, I think is also a very relevant point here as well. And then lastly, talking about what is your potential storage cost impact, right? If you're turning on things of Fabric, there is a potential for additional store costs. And are you okay with that? So those are kind of the main talking points that I'm thinking through as I'm working a transition. Anything else, Seth, you would want to add for
Those 2 points resonate with a lot of my long-windedness that I could have had with my final points. But the only touches I would say are, understand when your premium SKU is going to end.
That's true,
right? Because that gives you your back from there backwards point, and when you're doing that planning, and then the secondary point around additional costs, right? Like when you start focusing on fabric as a solution, there could be some potential challenges around like, hey, are you utilizing processes that are inefficient but SharePoint and backends that are already absorbed in the costs of that license, that all of a sudden, if you move into Azure, are gonna have like real monthly cost related to like storage, to Mike's point. And there's a bunch of stuff like that. But the pros, there's a lot of pros and cons, right? Like all of a sudden that's visible to a lot more people, or in an area that can be leveraged again, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that keep that as a secondary thing. If that's not part of what your PSKU is handling right now, right? If fabric is something you're going to grow into, make that a secondary thing after you just switch the license types.
I like that a lot. All right. Well, I really like that those comments. This has been very good. Lots of good thoughts here. We may revisit this topic again. We had so much stuff to think about, so maybe we'll go into this one in the future episode. But for now, thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate you all listeners getting in the chat, helping us run out the features here. This is something that I think people are excited about. Just thinking about it, figuring out what's going on here. So Power BI Premium, as we know it, is kind of going by the wayside. We're moving to only a Fabric capacity moving forward that does all the Power BI things and then some. So we're just thinking about how we turn those things on and off for our organization, I think is where we're trying to go with this conversation. So yeah, Power BI Premium, sayonara. We're sending you off into the sunset, riding off to the sunset. Now we're on to Fabric now, bigger and better things. That being said, if you like this episode, if this gave you some things to think about or some things you want to talk about with your organization, please share it with somebody else. We have these conversations to try and be very practical about what's happening in the Power BI ecosystem and give you some real useful things in your day-to-day job. So hopefully this is helping you out. If nothing else, share it with somebody else if you found this valuable as well. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Hey, Mike, Premium might be going to a farm upstate. We're not going anywhere. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. You can help us out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
Tommy, that was super on point. Very funny. Good job. All right. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.